Okay, so you know how jungles and rainforests and oceans are always full of life? Like, if you walk into a jungle, you're gonna be swarmed with bugs, animals, snakes, and you're not gonna be able to step anywhere because there's gonna be so many different plants and trees and vines and everything growing all around you. Even things like deserts have a lot of life that may not at first be visible, but it's still there, hidden under the sand. But then take something like a mountain and there's nothing there. Well, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say nothing. There is things like snow moss if you're into that. And of course, smaller mountains will have things like mountain goats or leopards or birds and stuff. But when you get to the real big, fat and juicy ones like Mount Everest, there is really nothing there at all. And it's a real shame because it could really be a fun place. It's kind of like a cake in a way, a plain, bare cake with nothing on it. It's a great foundation. There's so many different unique rock formations and natural landscaping that would work great for life to be there. It's a great starter, but a cake without anything on it is not a very good cake. If a baker made a cake and left it bare and naked with nothing on it, they'd have their baker's license removed and would be banned from ever touching a kitchen again. It should be against the laws of nature to leave such a perfect canvas without anything on it. And so today, we pick up where nature left off and finally get around to decorating the mountains. Alright, but where do we start? This seems like decorating a mountain could be a big undertaking. Actually, wait, no, it's not at all. Actually, you just start from the bottom. And the bottom, in this case, would be the bottom of the food chain. Because anything at the bottom of a food chain means that everything else needs to live off of it somehow. It's the most important thing. It's the foundation of everything else. So we need to start with that first. So then the question is, what is it exactly? What would the bottom of a food chain even be? Well, if you think of something like an ocean, there's things like sharks, which will eat fish, and then those fish will eat smaller fish, and then smaller fish, and it keeps going down, but eventually you reach the smallest sized fish there can be. So then at that point, what do they eat? Well, that would be plankton. And what do plankton eat? Well, they eat the sun. And as it seems to turn out, that's kind of always the case with food chains. It always goes down until eventually you reach the smallest creature they can be, and then it starts eating the sun. And so most of the time, that means that plants are the very foundation of the food chain, which I think means that for this mountain environment, we need to create a plant before anything else. There needs to be a plant that can be edible by a lot of things, and it needs to find a way to survive in this mountain habitat. So now I guess the question is, what are our options for this? It needs to be edible, of course. So probably some sort of fruit or vegetable or mushroom, fungus. But as it turns out, this is kind of a problem because plants are pretty fussy. They need a lot of things to survive, like minerals, water, sunlight, and of course, if the ground is frozen solid, they're not going to be able to absorb any water or minerals, even if they're there. So this could be a bit tricky, but I think we should start by looking at what plants can actually survive frost, at least for a little bit. So obviously, anything like a banana or coconut or any fruit like that has to be thrown out the window. Same with most vegetables or anything else. I think anything above the snow at all probably won't work because it'd probably just get blown away in the extreme wind, or it'd just get suffocated underneath all that snow. I think we need to look at something like the root vegetables. They, like potatoes, beets, and like onions and stuff, they can actually survive a bit of frost. If it gets below freezing in your garden, everything else can die, but the things that are underground, although I don't think they can really survive like that, they can last longer at least. I think any sort of plant really needs to be mainly underground, where it's at least more sheltered from the harsh conditions. However, there is still the problem that even if it's underground, I think the ground temperature is still going to be too cold. I know there's that thing about all caves and underground areas all kind of having a similar temperature, but the thing is, that doesn't really apply to a mountain because the average temperature of underground kind of relates to the surrounding temperature of the area. And so because a mountain is really high up, Actually, the average temperature of the sky in that area would just be really cold, which means that any underground areas on a mountain would also be extremely cold, too cold for anything to survive or absorb nutrients. So far on this mountain cake, we have the first ingredient of plant, something that needs to grow underground. And so I think now it's time to mix in another ingredient. And this, I think, is probably the most important ingredient for life, even more than the bottom of the food chain. Okay, so see this? This is a spot in Kvalgeti, Iceland. And you'll notice that the surrounding area is quite cold and snowy, yet the river itself is not frozen in the least. Actually, it's steamy and it's so hot. And that's due to geothermal activity. See, the Earth's core is pretty hot, there's a lot of magma, but sometimes the magma is not evenly spread out, and it comes closer to the surface. Now sometimes when this gets very close to the surface, this results in a volcano, or other times you wouldn't even know there's geothermal activity going on. It might look like a completely normal snowy cold area. Meanwhile, just a few feet below you, there could be a boiling hot river. And so I think you might be able to see where I'm going with this. If there was, say, a mountain with a whole bunch of geothermal activity going on underneath, although it's maybe still not the most realistic thing, I think it's a lot more plausible that plants could actually evolve to survive there. It'd still be tricky, they have to grow mainly underground with only a few parts sticking out, but it could happen. They would be able to absorb the minerals from the heated soil, and as long as some part of them is sticking out in order to be able to absorb sunlight, they would have all the things they need to survive. Okay, so now we have a bit more freedom here. We know we need something that can grow underground and is edible. But for this video, I'm thinking I'm only going to go over a few of them. I'm thinking like turnip, potato, carrot, maybe something like ginger or turmeric, garlic, beets, then maybe like a radish or something like that. Those are the ones I'm thinking of trying to do. Alright, so let's start with the turnip. How could we make a turnip suitable for a mountain? Well, first of all, I figured it'd have to go pretty deep underground. I think if it were to grow near the surface, it'd have to be pretty hardy to be able to survive the snow and conditions. So for this one, I'm thinking it'll be a softer plant, or at least not rock hard plant, because it will be growing a lot deeper down into the ground. Though by doing it this way, this does actually bring up another problem. As I said before, these things would kind of have to be the base food for the area, the bottom of the food chain for everything else to live off of. And so, the question is then, how would you actually, get it out of the ground? Because, if you just try to pull on it, well, I think the only thing you're going to accomplish from pulling on it would be pulling a muscle. I don't think these things are really coming out that easily. This isn't your average garden turnip. So whatever the creatures are that evolve here are going to need to evolve in such a way as to be able to pull the vegetables from the mountain, which is something we're going to have to keep in mind when we design the creatures later. Also, remember before how I said a plant would probably just be smothered by snow? Like if it just grew on flat ground, the snow would just pile up and it'd never be able to see sunlight. So imagine for these things, they'd actually grow into the walls, into the side of the mountain. Perhaps the seeds of the plant would be scattered in the strong winds into the nooks and crannies of rocks. Then when one seed eventually manages to blow deep enough to reach a bit of warmth, and then at that point, that could be where it starts to grow again into a new plant, while part of it grows out of the rock so that the leaves can absorb a bit of sunlight. Also, this might not be a very important question, but, what would they actually taste like? And I know that's kind of a hard question to answer, you could just say, oh, they taste like normal turnips, but, taste, there is actually a reason to why something tastes the way it does. There's a reason something like a strawberry tastes completely different from, meat. The tastes do depend on the area that the thing is growing in, and the temperature and stuff like that. The taste of a plant really comes down to its chemicals, the things it's made from. So I think we can assume for one that these turnips are not going to taste anything like a banana. They're going to taste probably similar to a normal turnip, but we can make some educated guesses at what it would taste like. For example, it seems like vegetables that grow in colder places typically have more starches and sugars in them. So it's very possible that a turnip might actually taste a lot more like a potato. It'd be starchier, it'd be sweeter, and it could be turned into fries a lot better. I mean, I don't know what a turnip fry tastes like, but I imagine a mountain turnip fry would be a lot better. And actually, that's a good idea, mountain fries, mountain chips. I'm going to need to think about that. Anyways, I should get on to the potato next. Yeah, so for this potato, I was thinking this one would probably actually grow near the surface, which means it's going to need to have some protection against, the cold and bad weather. So I was thinking, the edges of the potato could actually kind of be maybe like rubber almost, like it's shielding the potato's soft parts from the cold snow. And then the big leaves of the plant could also be protecting it from any snowfall, kind of like a snow umbrella. The skin of it would probably still have to be pretty hard, probably not something you're going to be biting into. Then again, I don't really know who would be biting into a potato. It doesn't seem very good. But I think the general idea of having it be kind of near the surface, surrounded by snow, I think that would work. And I mean, something growing on snow, although that might sound kind of hard, there are actually things that do it, like snow moss. I don't know how snow moss manages to grow on top of snow, but it finds a way, so it's not impossible. Also, I was thinking maybe it's like you'd have to rotate it to get it out of the ground, because it's kind of like screwed in almost. So I was thinking calling it something like the rotato. I don't know. And that's another thing you need to consider, how are these vegetables going to stay in the ground? So far we have a turnip, which just grows deep enough, and then the potato is kind of just wedged in the snow, maybe underground a bit, but not too much. But how are other things going to stick on the mountain? They need to have some way where they can be embedded into the rock somehow. And so this is where I'm kind of thinking of a lot of different ideas for this. Mainly taking a lot of inspiration from some other things that are pretty good at staying in the ground, such as staples or screws or pins, thumbtacks, even things like wooden stakes, like what a tent might have, the wooden pegs. Even something like a cork almost might work. I don't know about a cork really, but just something that can be wedged or stuck or nailed down into the rock and be secure enough that it won't blow away in a snowstorm. Also, it's a lot easier for things, I imagine, to be able to grow on the side of the rock, as I mentioned, because it won't get buried by snow that way. It just, of course, it needs to be stuck in the rock somehow. That's the big question. So, let's move on to the carrot. Well, a carrot, if you think about it, it's pretty screw-like, They're rounded, but if you just took a carrot and you made it a bit sharper, it's basically a screw. And that was exactly my idea for these carrots. Just a screw. Not really too complex and nothing too weird about them. They're just screws growing into the side of rock. And imagine also, if you want to harvest them, you can't pull them out, you have to twist them. Or get a drill. I don't think there's a carrot drill, but if there was a carrot drill, you'd use a carrot drill on these. And now for the next plant, I was kind of thinking something like ginger, or maybe a bit closer to turmeric. That kind of weirdly shaped plant, kind of beige color. Something like that. The question is, for this one, how is it going to stay in the rock? Well, I was thinking of something that could be kind of oddly shaped to match the weird shape of ginger, but also something that's secure enough, of course. So, one thing I actually thought of was maybe an anchor, like a ship anchor. That's kind of a weird shape. That could stay in the ground, but it also felt a bit odd kind of like a ship theme. I don't think that really matches with anything else I've done so far for this mountain. So then I thought, what about something like a hook? Like, what if the ginger was shaped like a hook, could kind of get latched down in the ground, making it harder for it to come out? And I was thinking, maybe it could even be almost like a dagger shape. Because I'm an artist. I want these things to look nice. Ginger is kind of, I don't want to insult it, but it's kind of a weird shape. It's not really iconic, you could say. So something like a dagger-shaped vegetable, I think, is a fairly iconic look, fairly memorable. I was also thinking, since ginger and turmeric have very bright centers, maybe these dagger vegetables could also be brightly colored in the middle, and maybe they could even be used as dye for like clothing or something. Since there is already a little bit of a purple theme going on with these mountains, I decided to go with a kind of bright magenta color. Also, I imagine, going back to the taste thing, because this is ginger or turmeric, it'd probably be more of a spice, not something like a potato you just eat the whole thing. You just use it as a spice. Though, then again, if these vegetables have more starches and sugars in them, I wonder if that'd even work for a spice. That might be kind of a weird spice. It wouldn't really be spicy. Maybe it'd be closer to like cinnamon or something. I'm not sure. I feel like there's a lot of really interesting food possibilities with all these vegetables. Like the spices, I guess, they would also be purple then if they're being made from this plant. So then that means that, like, say a soup or broth or something is probably going to have a bit of a purple hue to it, which is like an interesting idea. The food is going to be a bit magenta colored. I don't know, I'm going to have to keep that in mind. Anyways, let's try to do beets now. How would a beet work? Well, I've got quite a few focused on going deep underground, but what about this one actually staying close to the surface? Similar to the potato. The problem with that, of course, is that if there's something that is close to the surface, it's going to be exposed to a lot of snow and ice, which means it's going to have to be very hardy. It's going to have a very tough layer, and if it's that hard, then I think it's going to have trouble actually absorbing the sunlight. There's a reason plants are soft and green and not hard black balls of rock. But what if there's a plant that's like, it's hard when there's no sunlight, but when it's exposed to UV light, it becomes soft to be able to absorb it. It could be like the UV beet, or ray beet, or solar beet. I'm not sure. But this could be a beet that's close to the surface, rock hard to keep itself safe from all the cold, but then as soon as there's sunlight, it softens up. Now, I think this would mean that if you're trying to pick it, you probably would only be able to harvest it when it's sunny out. Or maybe it's like you pick it when there's no sun around, but then you just can't eat it because it's permanently hard. So you need to make sure either you pick it on a sunny day or you pick it when you have a UV light going. Because otherwise it'd just be rock hard and you wouldn't be able to break it open. Actually, maybe it could be called like the rock beet. I'm not sure, I have to think about this, but that's my idea for the beet. Okay, so let's move on to garlic now. I think that could be an interesting one. Well, immediately they remind me of clouds almost. They're white, kind of puffy shaped. I think leaning into the cloud aspects of them could work, considering this is a mountain with a lot of clouds around it. Though this does cause a bit of a problem, because it kind of clashes with the rest of the vegetables. All of the other mountain vegetables have been focused on being underground, but if something's going to be soft and cloud-like, then it doesn't make sense for it to be underground in rock. So I think these things would probably have to grow maybe on the side or almost the ceiling of the cliffs. And then maybe what happens, because as I said before, there's a real danger of vegetables being blown away in the harsh breezes. But maybe that's actually the purpose of these things. Maybe as they grow, they get bigger and bigger and fluffier and puffier until eventually the wind just takes them away. And then they kind of get then they could get like torn up in the breeze and like spit up around everywhere, and then that's what could cause them to grow again. It's basically like throwing seeds into a tornado. Sure, a lot of them won't end up anywhere good, but then a few of them might get wedged into the cracks it needs to be able to grow. Yeah, I think that works. Could be called the cloud garlic or something like that. But now, let's move on to the final one, the radish. Though I kind of want to make this one a little bit different. Well, as I said before, I had some things kind of based off of hooks or screws, things that can stay in the ground. What about like a thumbtack? It's certainly a unique shape, although I'm not entirely sure how that would work. I guess the long part of the thumbtack, like kind of the needle part, that would be in the ground. But then, what about the top flat part? What if it's like a pressure plate almost? Okay, yeah, I think I've got it now. I think the actual radish part should be kind of in the center of the thumbtack. It could be brightly colored to stand out from the rest of the plant, but then the top of the plant, instead of it really being leaves, it's more like a white, flat part, kind of blends in with the snow, maybe for camouflage. But maybe it's also fairly lightweight, because maybe what happens is, when you step on it, it springs up. You know, actually, maybe throw out the idea of a thumbtack. Maybe this is just a spring. Like, it's near the surface, part of it goes down a long ways to get the warmth, but then it's kind of like, if you step on it, or something steps on it, it would just spring into the air and float away, and that's how it could spread its seeds. Maybe it could be called something like a spring radish or something. I'm not sure. I haven't drawn it yet or anything, but that's what I'm thinking. It's harder for me to picture how that one will turn out because it's kind of a weirder design, but you'll see in the video what it turns into. Anyways, I think that works very well for the very bottom of the food chain for this mountain. But of course, that's just the bottom. We still have a whole bunch more interesting things to make, like the creatures that will eat it, then the creatures that will eat those creatures, then, I don't know, villagers. There's a lot of stuff to be made still. And I can't believe I just talked about vegetables for 23 minutes. So, I'm gonna have to stop it here, but next time, we'll go over the creatures, and that will be a good one. Especially since I don't think there's really much ground for things to move on, so I think they're gonna have to be mainly in the air or on the walls.